Welcome back to My Hot Kitchen, where we believe love should be the first ingredient you cook into any romantic meal for your sweetie. This week's romantic meal features a fancy-sounding caper garlic tapanade encrusted beef roast, smashed red potatoes, Swiss chard, and popovers. So a good rule of thumb is to always get going on the baked goods first. So let's get started on the popovers. I have 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1/3 cup of water, and 2/3 cup of milk. I'm going to whisk these together, also with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And popovers are technically a quick bread, although you'll notice there's no leavening like baking powder or baking soda in there. It's all the magic of the eggs and the formation of the glutens in the flour that make this magical creation work. So what I'm doing right now is whisking it together until there are no lumps left. That is one key to me knowing that I've developed the glutens properly in the mixture. Also going to make sure to scrape down the sides of the bowl and get all the flour mixed in there. And I'm going to know that I am at a happy place with my glutens when I pull the whisk out and it comes off in a long string. All right, next step is to melt about 1 tablespoon of butter. You can be a little bit generous on it. Do a little bit more than 1 tablespoon. That's great. And then get ready to add your eggs. Add them in 1 at a time. And beat them in thoroughly before you add the next one. And there's my butter. Excellent. Pull that into the mixture. Scrape it out, get all that goodness in there. Mix it with love. And picture the way that these bad boys are gonna fluff up. All right, it's time to add my second egg here. Now, fun thing about popovers is you don't have to use cold eggs or milk. In fact, it is better if they all sit out on the counter for a little bit and come to the same temperature. Room temperature seems to be best for this recipe. All right, so I'm convinced that the popover batter is ready. I'm gonna move on to the next step, which is greasing my muffin tins. Now here's a fun little trick for you. If you let your butter sit out on the counter and soften and then save the wrapper in the fridge, you can use it for purposes like this. What you need to do is make sure to grease each well of a muffin pan. If you're working with a small muffin pan, grease every other one. And do it lightly. You don't need to have it slathered in there or anything. Just a nice light coating to help keep it from sticking. Alrighty. And then, here's the fun part. Ladle or pour some of the batter into each of the muffin tins. Don't go past half full. About 1/3 should do the trick. So if you've never had popovers before, I think you'll find that they're a lot of fun. It's a bit like an eclair in taste and texture, but it's savory and a lot easier to make. And it's pretty magical how it just puffs up. It's really, really fun to watch. And there's a couple tricks that I'm going to make sure I tell you about that will ensure success. There we go. All right, the first trick, like I already mentioned, is to make sure that the muffin wells are not too full. The next trick is to put them into a very hot oven that's been preheated to 450 degrees. Bake them for 15 minutes, and without peeping or opening the door, you'll want to reduce the temperature to 350 degrees and bake it for about another 20 minutes. All right, so the first phase of baking has been completed. Now I'm going to reduce the temperature to 350 degrees. Do not open the oven door under any circumstances, and give them about another 20 minutes. Now it's time for the big moment of truth. When you open the oven door, take one out, set it on the counter, and watch it carefully to see if it collapses. No collapsing here, that means they're all done. So go ahead and take them out of the oven. Now, if you were to see your popover start to collapse as it sat on the counter, then you'd probably just want to put it back in the oven and give the pan another 5 minutes or so. And then just go to work getting them out of the pan. How fun are these? All right, and before we move on to the next segment, I want to show you what these look like on the inside. See, they're all hollow. How fun is that? It's the magic of the egg working with the glutens of the flour, and that's what happens. You know, I think I know a cameraman that would like to enjoy a popover.
Yum, thank you.
Don't be jealous. All right, now it's time to move on to the next part, the tapanade making. So there's 4 elements that go into this tapanade. There's a tablespoon of capers, about a ½ tablespoon of horseradish, a clove of garlic, and just a couple little slices of onion. So what you want to do is begin by turning your garlic into a bit of a paste. Smash it to loosen the skins. You'll notice that I'm working with a couple nice cloves of garlic here. Okay, skin off. Skin off, please. There we go. Trim off the root, because that's not very palatable. And then run your knife through the garlic, break it up. Run it through again. And kind of go with a scraping motion like this with your knife to start smashing the garlic up into a paste. It's totally okay if some capers work their way into there. In fact, the salt from the capers will help to break down the garlic. Once you've got the garlic worked down to chunks about the size of the capers, go ahead and start mincing it all together. Bring in the onion, give that a chance to get sliced up too. And then just work it with your knife or with a food processor until you have achieved a fairly fine paste. And traditionally, a tapanade refers to an olive puree made with Kalamata olives. But it can also refer to other savory ingredients such as capers that have been pureed up. At this point, I'm going to mix a little crushed black pepper into this. And what a fun combination of flavors to rub on a roast. Got your brininess from the capers, your richness from the garlic and onions, and a little zest from the horseradish and pepper. I think I'm going to call that good right there. Right now I'm going to partition off about that much, and that's going to be reserved for the sauce. The rest of it all gets rubbed on the roast. So I'm going to bring in my pan here. Bring my roast into the pan, working with a bottom round roast here. And I'm just going to pat down the roast with a delicious tapanade. Try to ensure a nice even coating. Make sure to get both sides too. And this is a really fun recipe that allows the natural flavors of the roast to shine through. If you would like, you can go ahead and marinate it in wine or beer for a few hours before you go to this process. But tonight, I'm feeling the flavor of the beef. All right, I'm gonna give my hands a little wash and then I'll put this in the oven. One last thing. Take a meat thermometer and put it in the middle of the roast. Make sure you've situated the roast so that it's fat side up so that it sort of marinates as it bakes. And then into the oven. It's gonna take about 45 minutes to an hour and a half. I like to pull mine at about 130 degrees so that it's nice and red and tender inside. I suppose I should mention that because I'm cooking a round rump roast, I'm doing it at 325 degrees. In the meantime, let's talk about mashed potatoes. So I have 3 medium red skin potatoes here, and I've sliced them up nice and thin, and I'm gonna go ahead and dump them in this boiling water. Woo! To that I'm gonna add a nice generous amount of salt, and there was also a clove of garlic that found its way into the pan. I'm gonna cook these until they are fork tender. And onto the sauce. This zesty little sauce is going to be built on a foundation of a nice brown roux. So I'm going to begin by adding a tablespoon of butter to my pre-warmed pan and get it all melted and happy. And then I'm going to add about a tablespoon of flour. Stir those together until I see no lumps. Then I'm going to stir it periodically as it goes through all the color changes until it's brown. So the roux is making good progress here. It's still not as dark brown as I'd like to see it. And I think it's time to check the potatoes and see if they're ready. Oh yeah, fork stuck in them breaks them right apart. Time to drain them off. So I have a colander over here on my sink and I'm gonna pour them all into there. Keep my pan handy. Shake them off. Back into the hot pan they go. Then back over here, while they're off the heat, I'm gonna add a pat of butter. I'm gonna smash this all together. I like to incorporate the butter really well first before I start adding the rest of the ingredients. And what I'm looking for is for a smooth consistency to develop here. Looks pretty good right there. Now I'm going to add a few diced up red peppers to make these loved up mashed potatoes. And salt, nice generous amount. And finally, a little milk. Cream or creme fraiche would work really well for this recipe too. My, don't those look yummy? Give them a little taste, see how they're seasoned. And then adjust them to your taste. I'm just going to cover these and set these off to the side. In the meantime, let's go back to the roux. The roux has developed a very deep caramel color. It's almost the darkness that I want to see. So I'm going to keep stirring it for a few more minutes until it reaches that color that I'm looking for. Well, that's fun. It's turned into a really nice dark caramel color and it's smelling quite toasty now. So at this point, I'm going to add that little pinch of tapanade that I reserved earlier from the steak. it in with the roux. Roux is really fun. It's very magical that flour and butter can turn into so many different flavors. What a fun way to thicken sauces. Each stage of darkness adds a progressively richer and richer flavor to your sauce. So like if you're making a light cream sauce, you just want to cook it till it's just barely turned crust white. If you're making a sauce to go over something beefy, go ahead and take it to this brown stage here. And once I've allowed the garlic a few moments to cook, I'm going to go ahead and add about an ounce of cooking sherry. You can substitute red wine for that, or you can omit it if you prefer. I think it adds a nice layer of flavor into this sauce. Gorgeous. And then about 4 to 6 ounces of your choice of beef or lamb stock. Using a little bit of homemade lamb stock for this. Oh, and don't forget about a nice little dollop of mustard, Dijon or stone ground, something better than what comes out of the yellow bottle. Stir this all together until all the ingredients are mixed. You're going to bring it up to a boil, drop it down to a simmer, and reduce it just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a little taste and see what I've created here. Oh wow, the richness of the capers and the garlic and the mustard all play together really nicely. I've brought it up to a boil, so I'm going to put a lid on it, reduce the temperature to simmer, and I get to go take a break for a few minutes. So I think that the roast is about ready to pull out of the oven. Excellent. My meat thermometer reads just a hair past 130. It's exactly the temperature I want to take it out at because I'm looking for a rare. And I'm going to let that sit here and rest for a few minutes while I get the Swiss chard going. Alrighty, so the Swiss chard is a really fun vegetable to work with. It has a flavor that's kind of reminiscent of spinach with a little hint of beet and a whole lot of yumminess. So what I'm going to do is gather these guys up here and I'm going to line up the stems together and I'm going to hack off most of the stem. The stem can be a bit fibrous and it's kind of reminiscent of celery in its texture, so it's not really something that I'm looking for in this particular dish, although it does have its applications. Last two, we'll hack, woohoo! All right, now my next task will be to sort of stack up the leaves here and roll them together and then cut them in a nice fat chiffonade cut. So kind of roll them in on themselves. Take your knife, just draw it through there. Beautiful. Kind of turns out with a big ribbony cut. Repeat with the other bunch. Now, it seems a little rowdy right now, and it definitely is a rowdy vegetable to be working with at this point, but once it cooks down, it will just be much easier to work with. Looks like I got some stock in there that I didn't want to begin with. I'll go ahead and take that out. Little stock won't hurt you. Okay, and now back over to my saute pan here, working with a nice large deep one. That was a little olive oil that I'm adding into the pan here. Give it a moment to warm up. And then I'm going to add a few slices of onion. It's more just for fun than anything. And I'm going to turn up my heat a little bit because I want to hear a happier sizzle than that. Give these guys a little toss here. And then once they've started to turn a bit translucent, that's when I'm going to go ahead and add the chard. Alrighty, I'm pretty happy with how those onions look right there. A little bit of browning on them will just enhance the flavor. And now, it's time to go ahead and add all the chard. Just do it all at once, get it over with. There we go. And it's helpful to have a couple spoons here so that you can sort of toss like so. I was doing a little reading on Swiss chard before we started this episode here tonight. And what I learned is that it's an excellent source of vitamin K and vitamin A. Vitamin K is excellent for maintaining your bone health. And the vitamin A, excellent for maintaining your vision health. So I think that Swiss chard should be on the menu more often for most of us. So just when I start to see it diminish in volume a little bit, that's when I'm going to start adding seasonings to it. This sort of leafy green seems to be most receptive when it's just starting to cook. A little salt, a little pepper, and a little drizzle of red wine vinegar. There we go. Keep it nice and simple so that the flavors of the vegetables shine through. You can hear the vinegar reacting with the oil. You can smell it doing its magic. See the greens wilting with each turn. There's lots of ways that you can cook chard. Some people prefer boiling it. Some people like to cream it. Most popular and tasty way, in my opinion, though, is a simple saute, just kind of like what you're seeing me do right now. You can get creative with the oils if you want to jazz it up a little bit. A little truffle oil or walnut oil would be amazing. Or you can keep it really simple. Olive oil or butter. You can get creative with the spices too. A little nutmeg would go nicely in here and help to counter the slight bitterness of the vegetable. Lots of ways for you to make it your own. It's really such a pretty vegetable. The red intensifies and the green darkens right as it's about at its peak. That's just about the point where I'm going to take it off the heat and let it finish up on its own. Not on my cutting board, right there on the counter. Let's pay attention to some of the other elements here. The mashed potatoes need a little warm up, so I'm going to put those back on the burner. And let's check on the sauce. It's reduced quite a bit. It's also thickened up quite a bit. Wow, that's quite the flavorful concoction. I love it. Now it's time to start cutting up the roast. So it's had several minutes to rest here. It should be cool enough to handle with your fingers. Go. Thermometer out of there. I'm going to start by cutting off the string. I'm not really into feeding my sweetie string. Right, free from the ties that bound it. Slice into this bad boy and see how it looks. Gonna slice off a few nice slices for us. Excellent. I can see that I gave it enough time to rest because my juices aren't running all over the cutting board. That should get us started. And then it's time to plate. Dinner plates here. Give myself a little space to work with. Oh, really? There we go. Bring on the mashed potatoes. And then the roast. Exquisite looking little fellow that you are. And then bring on the chard. That looks really pretty. Love the way the colors play off each other. Little sauce. Just a little drizzle over the meat. these on the table. Going to need the popovers as well. Well, that was a fun little take on a traditional roast beef dinner, complete with the popovers. Pair this up with a nice smoky, rich Chardonnay or a nice robust red wine. Call in your sweetie. You're out. Honey.
Man, it smells so good.
Hi.
Wow, you look stunning.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, sir. Hungry?
I'm starving.
Bet.
Ooh, then let us switch chard too. Wow, this is such a hot kitchen.
So thanks for joining me in my hot kitchen tonight. Have fun turning up the heat in your kitchen, and I'll see you next week. Night-night. Pet the kitties.